Here is a number that I find genuinely hard to sit with. The average American eats dinner alone more than half the time. Not occasionally, more than half the time. And the meal itself, when you look at what's actually on the plate, is 57% ultra-processed food by caloric share, according to a 2021 analysis published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition tracking over 41,000 adults. Now here is the second number. In the mountain villages of Sardinia's Nuoro province, researchers following a cohort of adults over 70 found rates of cardiovascular disease and metabolic syndrome that were, by multiple measures, less than a third of what we see in age-matched American populations. Same species, same basic biology, radically different outcome. The difference is not medication, it's not a supplement protocol, and it's not, as most Blue Zone summaries will tell you, simply a matter of eating more vegetables. The difference goes deeper than that, and it shows up most clearly at one specific moment in the day. Dinner, not breakfast, not lunch. The evening meal is where the gap between how we live and how they live becomes most visible. And I've spent years looking at why. Before we're done, I want to show you the piece of this that almost every Blue Zone researcher has noted, but almost nobody talks about in plain terms. It's not a food. It's not a nutrient. And when I first understood what it actually does to your body and your brain over time, I went back and read the papers again to make sure I hadn't misread them. I hadn't. Let me show you someone who has been doing this without thinking about it for his entire life. His name is Giovanni. He is 97 years old. Every evening, just before the sun drops behind the hills above Orgosolo, he walks down a steep stone path to his daughter's house. He has walked this path every evening for approximately 60 years. When he arrives, there are usually between 5 and 12 people at the table. He does not sit down immediately. He stands at the head of the table, pours a small glass of Cannonau wine, and waits for everyone to be seated before he takes his chair. His doctor, who is 64 and has known Giovanni for 20 years, told a researcher from the University of Sassari that Giovanni's inflammatory markers at 97 are lower than most of his patients in their mid-50s. The doctor said this without irony. He was simply reporting what he saw. Giovanni did not do this intentionally. He did not read a study. He did not follow a protocol. He moved through life the way the people around him moved through life, and that life happened to be one of the most biologically effective environments humans have ever accidentally created. Now meet Robert. He is 58 years old and lives outside of Cleveland, Ohio. Robert is not careless with his health. He is genuinely trying. He takes a statin, a fish oil capsule, a vitamin D supplement, and a probiotic every morning. He goes to the gym 3 times a week. He has tried keto, then Mediterranean, then the Mind diet. His last blood panel showed C-reactive protein at 3.2 milligrams per liter, which his doctor described as a little elevated, and suggested they keep an eye on it. Robert eats dinner alone 4 nights out of 7. It takes him about 11 minutes. He is doing everything he was told, and the gap between his inflammatory markers and Giovanni's at 97 is not closing. There is one thing Giovanni does every single evening that ties all of this together. It is not a food. It is not a supplement. It is the thing that the researchers almost skipped over because it seemed too obvious to matter. I will come back to it. But first, I want to show you why the American dinner, specifically, has become one of the most quietly damaging patterns in modern health. You have probably been told that the Mediterranean diet is the gold standard for longevity. That logic sounds solid on the surface, but the data tells a different story, or rather, a more specific one. The Mediterranean diet, as it's typically presented in American health media, is a food list. Olive oil, fish, whole grains, vegetables, legumes. Those foods are real. The benefits are real. But the food list is not the diet. The diet is an entire ecology of eating, when, how, with whom, at what pace, in what emotional context, and the food list captures maybe 40% of what's actually happening. A 2019 paper published in The Lancet analyzed dietary data across 195 countries, and found that poor diet was responsible for approximately 11 million deaths annually, more than tobacco. But the mechanism that drove the highest risk wasn't fat consumption or carbohydrate intake. It was three things: low intake of whole grains, low intake of legumes, and high sodium from processed food. Not the macronutrient ratios that have consumed decades of nutrition debate. The actual killers were much simpler and much more specific. Meanwhile, Americans spend approximately $160 billion a year on dietary supplements, a number that has more than doubled in the last 20 years. Sardinian centenarians spend nothing on supplements. Their inflammatory markers are better. Their cognitive function at 85 outperforms American averages by measurable distances. I'm not saying money is the problem. I'm saying we've been solving the wrong problem, with the wrong tools, for a long time. And the clearest place to see that is dinner. Here's where it gets interesting. When researchers at the Blue Zones project conducted direct observations of centenarian eating habits across all 5 Blue Zones, they noticed that the evening meal, dinner, was structurally different from anything in the standard American dietary pattern, not just in content, in architecture. And the architecture turned out to matter as much as the food. Let me start with what's actually on Giovanni's plate. The primary food at a Sardinian dinner table in the mountain villages is not what most people expect. It is not fish. It is not meat. On most evenings, the centerpiece is a bowl of minestrone, and not the canned, sodium-loaded version that shares the name in American supermarkets. This is a slow-cooked, deeply specific thing. The Sardinian minestrone that centenarian households have eaten for generations contains borlotti beans, about 200 grams cooked per person, which is roughly a full cup. It contains seasonal vegetables, typically whatever is growing. In winter, cavolo nero and fennel. In summer, zucchini and tomatoes. There is almost always a rind of aged pecorino cheese dropped into the pot while it cooks, which is not decoration. It dissolves slowly and enriches the broth with calcium and conjugated linoleic acid. The whole thing simmers for a minimum of 90 minutes. Some women in Orgosolo simmer theirs for 3 hours. This is not a side dish, it is the meal. And the biological activity it triggers over the 6 hours after you eat it is specific and measurable. The borlotti beans alone deliver approximately 15 grams of resistant starch and soluble fiber per serving. Resistant starch is fermented by the gut microbiome into short-chain fatty acids, primarily butyrate, propionate, and acetate. Butyrate is the primary energy source for colonocytes, the cells that line your colon, and it has been shown to have direct anti-inflammatory effects on the intestinal wall. A 2020 study in Nature Communications, drawing on microbiome sequencing from nearly 1,500 participants, found that high-fiber, legume-forward diets produced significantly higher populations of Bifidobacterium and Faecalibacterium prausnitzii, 2 bacterial species that are consistently lower in people with metabolic syndrome, obesity, and colorectal cancer. The slow cooking matters for a reason that has nothing to do with convenience. When legumes are cooked for 90 minutes or more, their lectin content drops substantially, and their resistant starch structure becomes more accessible to gut bacteria. The difference in fermentation activity between a 20-minute pressure-cooked bean and a 90-minute simmered bean is not trivial. It's the difference between food that feeds you and food that feeds your microbiome. The pecorino rind is doing something specific too. Aged pecorino from Sardinia, particularly the sheep's milk variety from the Nuoro province, contains one of the highest natural concentrations of conjugated linoleic acid of any food on Earth. A 2016 review in the Journal of Dairy Science found that CLA from pasture-raised ruminants was associated with reduced adipogenesis and lower inflammatory markers in multiple human trials. Giovanni's family does not know what conjugated linoleic acid is. They know that the rind goes in the pot, and the soup tastes right when it does. Here is how you actually make this work at home. You need dried borlotti beans, not canned, dried, soaked overnight for a minimum of 8 hours. You cook them in fresh water with a bay leaf for 60 to 90 minutes until completely tender. You then build the soup. Diced seasonal vegetables in olive oil for 10 minutes. Add the beans with their cooking liquid. Add water or unsalted stock. Drop in a Parmesan or pecorino rind if you have one, and simmer for another 30 to 45 minutes. No salt until the very end. Salt added during cooking toughens bean skins and reduces nutrient absorption. A drizzle of raw olive oil over the top before serving. The total cost is under $4 for 4 people. The preparation is largely passive. You are not standing over a stove. You are living your evening while the pot does the work. The mistake I see most often: people treat this as an addition to their existing dinner. They cook their usual meal and add a cup of soup on the side. That is not what Giovanni does. The soup is dinner. The displacement of the ultra-processed, high-sodium, rapid glycemic evening meal is as important as what replaces it. Take a moment and think about the last 3 dinners you made. How many ingredients came from the earth versus a factory? Not as a judgment, as data, because the answer is where you start. Now, if this were the whole story, I'd stop here. But when you look at how Giovanni actually eats that minestrone, there is another layer that makes everything I just described work differently than it would in isolation. The Cannonau wine gets discussed a lot in coverage of Sardinian longevity. It deserves to be discussed, but usually for the wrong reasons. The typical explanation goes, Cannonau is high in polyphenols. Polyphenols are antioxidants. Antioxidants are good. That is true, but it misses what the wine is actually doing in the context of the Sardinian dinner. Cannonau grapes grown in the granite soils of the Nuoro highlands produce a wine with 2 to 3 times the resveratrol concentration of most other red wines. A 2013 study published in Molecules, analyzing 22 varieties of Sardinian Cannonau, confirmed resveratrol concentrations ranging from 1.5 to 3.1 milligrams per liter, substantially above the European average. Resveratrol activates the SIRT1 pathway, which is involved in cellular stress response, mitochondrial function, and insulin sensitivity. The mechanism is real and the dosing matters, but here is the piece that gets left out. The centenarians in Sardinia's Blue Zone drink their Cannonau slowly, with food in the presence of other people, usually over 90 to 120 minutes. The rate of consumption changes everything. When alcohol is consumed slowly with a fiber-rich meal, its absorption curve flattens, the glycemic impact of the meal moderates, and the polyphenol uptake is sustained rather than spiked. A 2018 study in the European Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that consuming red wine with a legume-based meal versus the same wine consumed without food reduced postprandial blood glucose by approximately 27% and significantly lowered the insulin response. The beans and the wine are not coincidental companions. They are a system. The amount matters. Giovanni drinks 100 to 150 milliliters with dinner, roughly 1 small glass. Not 2, not 3. The dose in Sardinian tradition is a social dose, not a therapeutic one. Nobody in Orgosolo is drinking wine because they read about resveratrol. They drink it because it is part of how the evening unfolds. I want to be careful here, because the research on alcohol is contested and the risks are real for certain populations. The Sardinian pattern is not a license to drink. It is a description of how, in a specific cultural context, a specific quantity of a specific food interacts with the broader meal architecture in a measurable way. If you don't drink, a small glass of dark grape juice provides a meaningful portion of the polyphenol activity without the alcohol. The biology of the interaction is partly about the polyphenols and partly about the pace. And the pace is where it all connects. The average American dinner takes 11 to 14 minutes from first bite to clearing the plate. I've seen this figure cited in multiple observational studies, and it's consistent enough that I find it more useful to just state it plainly. 11 minutes. Giovanni's dinner table runs for 90 to 120 minutes on a normal evening, not a special occasion. Tuesday. The satiety hormones, specifically ghrelin suppression and leptin signaling, operate on a 20-minute lag from the start of eating. If you finish your meal in 11 minutes, your brain has not had time to register fullness before the food is gone. You have eaten beyond your actual caloric need before the biological signal arrives. Over thousands of meals across years, this is not a minor rounding error. At this point, you know more about this than most people who talk about blue zones online. But the thing that actually keeps Giovanni at 97 with the inflammatory markers of a 55-year-old, that's what I want to show you now. What we do in the West at dinner, we eat alone or in front of a screen 57% of the time, consuming meals with an average of 31 ingredients, most of them processed, taking 11 minutes, then managing the metabolic consequences with a $160 billion supplement industry and a statin prescription. What Giovanni does, he walks downhill to a crowded table, eats a bowl of slow-cooked beans and seasonal vegetables, drinks one small glass of wine over an hour and a half, and argues loudly with his son-in-law about the regional politics of Nuoro province. His pharmacy is his kitchen garden and his daughter's table. His doctor is his dinner plate. His therapy is the argument with the son-in-law. No tracking app, no meal prep containers, no monthly subscription, no protein powder, no anti-inflammatory capsule. They didn't have a wellness routine. They had a life that didn't need one. Here is what I promised you at the beginning, and it is probably not exactly what you expected. The single behavior that most distinguishes centenarian dinner culture in Sardinia, the thing that shows up most consistently in the research and least consistently in the popular summaries, is not a food. It is not a cooking method. It is what the researchers from the University of Sassari, in their 2009 demographic study of the Nuoro Blue Zone, described as social density at the evening meal. Every night, Giovanni eats with people. Not occasionally, every night. This sounds unremarkable until you look at what happens physiologically when humans eat in social groups versus alone. A 2017 study published in Adaptive Human Behavior and Physiology, drawing on data from over 15,000 adults, found that people who ate most of their meals with others reported significantly higher life satisfaction. But more than that, they showed measurably better metabolic markers, lower cortisol responses to stress, and higher self-reported levels of meaning and security. The mechanism appears to involve both the pace-slowing effect of social eating and the oxytocin release associated with positive social interaction, which has direct downstream effects on inflammatory cytokines. Shared meals slow you down. Physically, you pause, you talk, you gesture with your fork, but also metabolically. The parasympathetic nervous system, which governs the rest and digest response, activates more fully in calm, socially connected states. The same meal eaten in a calm, social context versus alone in front of a screen produces a measurably different hormonal environment before, during, and after digestion. This is not soft science. It is not wellness content. There is a documented mechanistic pathway between social eating, nervous system state, digestive function, and long-term inflammatory markers. And the researchers almost missed it because it seemed too social to be a health finding. Giovanni does not think of the evening meal as a health behavior. He thinks of it as family. He would not understand the question if you asked him why he eats with people every night. The question would not make sense to him. Of course you eat with people. What else would you do? What's radical to us is routine to him. That gap is the entire lesson. The researchers who spent time in Orgosolo noted something else. The multi-generational nature of the table meant that no single generation was eating alone. The oldest people in the village were anchored to purpose and presence every single evening. They were not optional. They were expected. Giovanni is not just attending dinner, he is presiding over it. His presence is the structure. In the research on Ikigai in Okinawa and Plan de Vida in Nicoya, purpose is consistently flagged as a longevity variable. Sardinia's version of purpose is quieter and less philosophically explicit. It is simply, people need you at the table tonight. That is hara hachi bu for the soul. Not a formula, a fact. Here is what to expect honestly if you start working these changes into your evenings. In the first 7 days, you will probably notice a small signal and nothing dramatic. The legume-based dinner will produce different digestive activity. Some bloating is normal in the first week as your microbiome adjusts to higher fiber intake. This is not a problem. It is evidence that fermentation is happening. Drink more water. It passes. At 30 days, the research suggests that cravings for late evening snacking tend to quiet down noticeably. This is partly the satiety effect of resistant starch. Butyrate production peaks 6 to 8 hours after you eat, which lands in the middle of the night, keeping blood sugar steadier and appetite more regulated by morning. Many people report their breakfast appetite shifting. They want something lighter because they are genuinely less hungry. At 60 days, the blood panel conversation with your doctor may start to look different. The markers worth tracking are C-reactive protein for systemic inflammation, fasting glucose, HbA1c if diabetes is in your family history, and triglycerides. Ask for these specifically if your panel doesn't include them by default. I'm not going to tell you what they will say. I am telling you that 60 days of consistent legume-forward dinners, slowed eating pace, and reduced processed food intake is enough time for those numbers to shift in a direction worth discussing. At 90 days, the most significant change is often not biological. It is behavioral. The new dinner is no longer a project. It's just what you make. The beans are soaked the night before out of habit. You have found one or two people, a partner, a neighbor, a family member, anyone, with whom you share most meals. The 11-minute dinner is a memory. This is the threshold the research calls habituation, and it is the point at which the benefit compounds without effort. Will this fix everything? No, nothing will. But the question isn't whether it's perfect, it's whether it's better than what you're doing now. I want to be straight with you. This isn't magic. It's food, patience, and consistency. The evidence behind it is stronger than most of what your pharmacy sells. And the beautiful thing about it is that it costs you almost nothing except attention and time. Two things that, if you spend them at a dinner table with someone you care about, turn out not to feel like a sacrifice at all. Giovanni is still walking down that stone path this evening. Nothing about his routine is remarkable in Orgosolo. He is not a health story. He is just a man going to dinner. The distance between you and Giovanni is not genetics. It's not geography. It is a series of small, quiet choices made consistently over time. The choice of what you put in the pot. The choice of how long you let it simmer. The choice of who you call tonight and say, "Come over, dinner's almost ready." You can start the first one tonight. Soak a cup of dried borlotti beans, or cannellini, or pinto if that's what you have. Cover them with cold water and leave them on the counter. Tomorrow evening, cook them. That is the beginning. That is all it is. I publish a new piece of this research every single day. Different zone, different centenarian, different layer of what the evidence actually says. If that is what you are looking for, subscribe, and I will see you tomorrow. And one question before you go. Think honestly about your last week of dinners. Were you sitting with someone? And if not, whose number do you need to dial tonight? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one.